Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to get you well-informed, fast. Today, we're diving headfirst into ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Now, this isn't just some buzzword. It's really reshaping how businesses operate and how investors make decisions pretty much globally. So think of this as your fast track to truly understanding its core. Our mission for this deep dive, well, it's to unpack the critical concepts, the key frameworks, and, the real-world applications of ESG. Whether you're just trying to make sense of your company's latest sustainability report, or maybe you're curious about where responsible business is heading, we've pulled together a fantastic stack of sources to guide us.
And that's exactly what we're aiming for. ESG can feel incredibly dense sometimes, all those acronyms, complex reports. But, our sources really do give us a pretty clear roadmap. We're going to distill the most important bits, offer maybe some surprising facts, and just help you cut through that noise with real clarity.
Okay, great. So let's kick things off with the absolute basics. What exactly is ESG? When we talk about these three letters, what are we really getting at?
Right. So at its core, ESG is basically a framework. It helps evaluate a business's sustainability and its ethical impact, looking through three critical lenses. Think of it like a holistic report card for the company. First up, you've got the environmental pillar, the EE. This is all about a company's impact on the natural world. Pretty straightforward, right? Are they managing their carbon footprint? How do they handle waste? What about resource consumption, like water? Or their initiatives on climate change? It's about their operational footprint, basically.
Right, so E is their direct ecological impact. Got it. What about the S?
Okay, the social aspect, the S, dives into how a company manages its relationships with its employees, its customers, the communities it operates in. This includes things like labor practices, diversity and inclusion, DEI, that's a big one, customer satisfaction, human rights in the supply chain, community engagement. It's really about fairness, people, human capital.
And the G, governance. That feels like it's kind of the backbone holding it all together.
It absolutely is. Governance, the G, refers to the leadership, the internal rules, policies, the oversight structures within a company. It's about things like board independence. Is the board diverse? How's executive compensation structured? Ethics, compliance, transparency, fundamentally how decisions get made. And, crucially, the G often dictates how well a company can actually do the E and S. Without strong governance, ESG can easily just be talk, not real action.
That's a really important point. So, okay, we've defined them. But why does this all matter so much now? For businesses, for investors, what's the real pull?
For businesses, it's increasingly about resilience and long-term value. Strong ESG performance is, it's a powerful tool for risk management. It helps companies spot and mitigate potential environmental issues or social unrest or governance failures before they blow up. We're also seeing a huge surge in regulatory compliance needs globally. ESG disclosure isn't really optional anymore in many places. And then, let's be honest, brand reputation and customer trust are massive. Consumers, even other businesses, are choosing companies that align with their values. Plus, there's often real operational efficiency gains, saving money from energy conservation, waste reduction, and it's a big factor in talent attraction and retention. People want to work for ethical, forward-thinking companies.
Okay, so that's the business case. What about the investors? Why are they so focused on ESG?
For investors, the story is just as compelling. ESG-aligned companies often show more sustainable growth patterns. They tend to have lower long-term risks. Now, it's not a guaranteed shortcut to quick profits, but numerous studies do suggest companies with strong ESG performance can deliver better risk-adjusted returns. They often prove more resilient in downturns. Plus, there's just enormous regulatory and market demand pushing capital towards ESG investments. It's becoming a core part of modern portfolio management, really.
Now, here's where it gets interesting for me. You hear ESG, and sometimes you think of CSR, corporate social responsibility. They sound kind of similar, but our sources highlight a key difference. What is that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it trips people up all the time. It's a common confusion. Think of it like this. CSR is often about a company's voluntary efforts, philanthropy, community initiatives. It's largely qualitative. It's focused on goodwill, brand perception, and often seen as kind of separate from the core business operations. We're talking charitable donations, employee volunteering days, sponsoring a local football team. It's about doing good out there in the community.
Okay, so CSR is more like optional goodwill projects.
Exactly. Whereas ESG is much more structured, it's measurable, and crucially, it's integrated. It's about these environmental, social, and governance factors being woven into the company's core strategy. It's risk management, it's investment decisions, it's data-driven, often quantitative, and increasingly it's mandatory or at least highly expected by investors, by regulators.
Mm.
So while a company might donate to charity, that's CSR, reducing its carbon emissions profile or ensuring board diversity, those are ESG actions tied directly to its operational and financial health. ESG is about being good in a systematic, accountable way, not just doing good on the side.
That distinction really helps. CSR as external philanthropy, ESG as internal strategy. Makes sense. And speaking of regulations, it feels like governments everywhere are really stepping up their game on ESG reporting lately. How is this global regulatory landscape taking shape?
Oh, it's definitely a dynamic space. Transparency and accountability are the big drivers. Let's maybe look at three key examples. In India, you've got the SEBI BRSR. That's the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting Framework. It became mandatory for the top 1,000 listed companies starting from the 2022-23 financial year. The idea is to get companies reporting more holistically, beyond just the financials, to boost transparency and help investors.
Okay, so India's pushing for broad disclosure. What about Europe? They always seem pretty ahead on environmental stuff.
They really are. The EU CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, is frankly a game changer for the European Union. It was adopted in January 2023, and it massively expands the reporting obligations. We're talking over 50,000 companies falling under its scope, and it's mandatory for many starting in 2024. The really crucial concept here is double materiality.
Double materiality.
Yes.
Yeah.
It means companies have to report not only how sustainability issues impact them financially, but also how their own operations impact the environment and society. It's a two-way street. Plus, it requires third-party assurance verification to add credibility.
Wow, double materiality. That's a really powerful idea. Looking inward and outward, that forces some serious reflection. And in the U.S., what's the latest with the SEC?
Right, across the pond, the SEC Climate Disclosure Rule was proposed back in March 2022. Now, we're still waiting on the final rule, but the goal is clear. Mandate climate-related risk disclosures for publicly traded companies right in their SEC filings. This would include Scope 1 and 2 emissions and Scope 3 emissions if they're deemed material to the business. It's really about standardizing how U.S. companies report climate risks and opportunities, letting investors properly assess the financial implications.
Okay.
So you can see, these regulations are quite different in focus. India's BRSR is broad on responsibility. The EU's CSRD pushes this extensive double materiality, and the SEC rule zeroes in, or aims to zero in, on climate risk for public firms. But they all share that same underlying goal: drive much greater transparency and accountability.
That makes a lot of sense. So with all these different regulations and just the sheer breadth of ESG, how do companies actually measure and report on all this stuff? What are the main frameworks guiding them?
Yeah, this is where standardized frameworks become, well, essential, really, for creating data that's actually comparable and reliable. Probably the most widely used one globally is the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. It's used by, I think, over 10,000 organizations worldwide. It helps them disclose their economic, environmental, and social impacts. What's kind of unique about GRI is its stakeholder-oriented approach, and its focus on materiality, guiding companies to report on the issues that matter most to their various stakeholders. It's also modular. You have universal standards, sector standards for specific industries, and then topic standards like, say, GRI 305 for emissions reporting.
Okay, so GRI provides that comprehensive picture looking at broad impact for all stakeholders. What are some of the other major frameworks people should know about?
Well, if GRI is broad and stakeholder-focused, then SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, takes a different tack. SSB, which is now part of the ISSB, provides industry-specific standards for 77 different industries, and its primary focus is financial materiality, meaning it zooms in on the ESG factors most likely to impact a company's financial performance, its bottom line. So it's very investor-oriented, designed to slot in alongside traditional financial reporting like GAAP or IFRS.
Got it. Industry-specific, financially focused. What else?
Then there's TCFD, that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This framework came out of the G20's Financial Stability Board, and it is laser-focused on climate-related financial risks. It pushes companies to disclose how climate change might affect their business, both the physical risks, like storms, and the transition risks, like policy changes moving to a low-carbon economy. It also encourages forward-looking scenario analysis. And it's structured around 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, including those crucial Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions.
Right, TCFD sounds like it's really trying to make climate risk just another standard financial risk factor. And I hear a lot about the ISSB these days. What's their role?
You certainly do. The ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, set up in 2021, is a major player now. Their big goal is true global standardization. They're basically consolidating and building upon frameworks like SSB and TCFD. They started with a climate-first approach. You might have heard of their IFRS S1 and S2 standards. The expectation is that ISSB will become the global baseline for sustainability disclosures over time.
A global baseline, that would certainly simplify things eventually.
Hopefully. And finally, just quickly, there's also integrated reporting, the IR framework. This one offers a really holistic view. It combines financial and ESG reporting to explain how a company creates value over the long term. It uses what they call the 6 capitals model: financial capital, manufactured, intellectual, human, social, and natural capital. It's less about just metrics and more about telling the value creation story.
That's a fantastic overview. So clearly, lots of frameworks, each with a slightly different angle, broad stakeholder views, industry-specific financial stuff, deep climate focus. But with all these options, how does a company actually figure out which ESG issues they should focus on? It must feel like trying to boil the ocean.
It absolutely can feel that way, and that's precisely why the concepts of materiality and stakeholder engagement are so fundamental in ESG. Materiality in the ESG context basically refers to the significance of an ESG issue. Does it influence the company's financial performance? Does it influence the decisions of its stakeholders? It's about identifying what truly matters, what's material.
Okay, so it's about cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And to break that down a bit, we often talk about different types of materiality. There's financial materiality, which looks at how ESG factors impact the company's finances. That's the focus of SASB and ISSB. Then there's impact materiality, which is about how the company's operations affect people, society, the environment. You see this focus more in GRI and the U, CSRD. And then the one that ties it together or complicates it, depending on your view, is double materiality.
Right. You mentioned that with CSRD.
Yeah, it combines both. It demands companies assess both the financial risks to them from sustainability issues and their impact on society and the environment. It's that two-way assessment.
So it's really seeing the company in the world and the world's impact on the company. That's quite profound. So how does a company actually do that? How do they figure out what's material?
Well, it's a structured process usually. First, they identify a broad list of potential ESG topics relevant to their sector. Then, and this is where stakeholder engagement is key, they actively talk to their major stakeholders: investors, employees, customers, regulators, NGOs, local communities. They use surveys, roundtables, maybe dedicated committees to understand which issues matter most to those groups. The results often get plotted on something called a materiality matrix. It usually maps importance to the business on one axis against importance to stakeholders on the other. This helps visually prioritize the issues that are high on both, which are the ones they really need to focus on and report on.
So engagement drives the prioritization.
Absolutely. And stakeholder engagement isn't just a box-ticking exercise. It's vital for understanding different perspectives, managing risks proactively, building trust, and sometimes even finding new opportunities or innovations. Think about, say, an energy company engaging transparently with local communities about emissions or land use. That can prevent major social risks down the line, maybe even turn potential conflict into collaboration.
That's a great practical example. It sounds like this continuous loop. Engagement informs materiality, materiality shapes strategy and reporting.
Okay, so if a company is doing all this detailed work, how do outsiders, especially investors, actually judge their ESG performance? Is there like a standard ESG score they get?
Not one single universal score, no. But there are influential ESG scorecards and ratings provided by specialized agencies. These are really critical tools for investors and other stakeholders. 3 of the biggest names you'll probably hear are MSCI, Sustainalytics, and S&P Global.
Okay, tell us about them. MSCI.
Right. MSCI ESG ratings give an industry relative risk assessment. They score companies on a scale from AAA, which is leader, down to CCC, laggard. Their focus is mainly on how well a company manages the ESG risks and opportunities that are financially material for its specific industry. So data privacy might weigh heavily for a tech company, while emissions are key for an automaker. It's peer relative.
Okay, so MSCI compares companies to their industry peers on managing risk. What about Sustainalytics? Sustainalytics ESG risk ratings, which are now owned by Morningstar, they measure a company's unmanaged ESG risks. Their scale goes from negligible risk, like 0-10, up to severe risk, 40+. What's interesting here is they look at a company's inherent exposure to ESG risks based on its business and how well management is actually mitigating those risks. They also factor in ongoing controversy monitoring. So it's about identifying potential vulnerabilities.
Unmanaged risk, that's a useful lens. And S&P Global, they're linked to the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, right?
Exactly. S&P Global ESG scores heavily influence which companies get into the prestigious Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, DJSI. They gather a ton of data from public disclosures and other sources, scoring companies from 0 to 100, often against industry benchmarks. Their focus tends to be on financial materiality, transparency, and long-term value creation.
So different agencies, different scores potentially.
That's the key takeaway. Their methodologies do vary. They might weigh factors differently, focus on different types of materiality, use slightly different data, so a company can get different scores from different providers. This can sometimes confuse people, but it also just reflects the complexity and the evolving nature of ESG assessment. But the bottom line is, proactive, well-managed ESG strategies generally help improve ratings across the board, which can definitely boost investor confidence and access to capital.
That makes sense why you see different headlines sometimes about the same company's ESG standing. It depends who's doing the rating and what they prioritize. Okay, let's zoom in now on a really big piece of the E in ESG, something that's always in the news. Carbon footprint. What exactly is it, and how do companies even start measuring something so complex?
Right. A carbon footprint, fundamentally, is the total amount of greenhouse gases, GHGs, that are emitted directly or indirectly by an entity. That could be an individual, an organization, even a product, or an event. It's always expressed in a standard unit, carbon dioxide equivalent, or CORO. This is important because it accounts for the different warming impacts of various GHGs, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O, those fluorinated gases, by converting them all to the equivalent impact of CO2.
Okay, so it's a standardized measure for all greenhouse gases. How do they measure it?
The go-to international standard for accounting and reporting is the GHG protocol. It was developed by the World Resources Institute, WRI, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. And the key thing the GHG protocol does is categorize emissions into 3 scopes. Understanding these scopes is absolutely fundamental to understanding carbon footprints.
Right, scope 1, 2, and 3. Let's break those down. Scope 1.
Scope 1 covers direct emissions. These come from sources that are owned or controlled by the reporting organization. Think about the fuel burned in the company's own delivery trucks or seat cars, or the natural gas burned in boilers on site for heating or industrial processes, or even fugitive emissions, like refrigerants leaking from company-owned air conditioning units. These are emissions the company is directly generating itself.
Okay, so scope 1 is the stuff coming directly from their own operations. What about scope 2?
Scope 2 covers indirect emissions, specifically from purchased energy. This is mainly the electricity a company buys from the grid, but it also includes purchased steam, heating, or cooling. Now, the emissions physically happen at the power plant, not the company's office, but the company is responsible because it's consuming that energy. So if a company switches to buying certified renewable electricity, that directly reduces its Scope 2 footprint.
Gotcha. Purchase energy and scope 3. I always hear that's the really tricky one.
It absolutely is, and it's often the largest category by far. Scope 3, which covers other indirect emissions. These are all the emissions that occur in a company's value chain, both upstream and downstream, but from sources not owned or controlled by the company itself. This is huge. It includes emissions from producing the raw materials and components they buy, purchased goods and services, employee commuting, business travel, transportation and distribution of their products, the waste generated in their operations that gets sent elsewhere, and even the emissions generated when customers use their products and the emissions for the end-of-life treatment of those products.
Wow, that's everything else.
Pretty much. The GHG protocol breaks Scope 3 down into 15 distinct categories. For many companies, especially in sectors like retail or consumer goods, Scope 3 can easily account for 80%, 90%, maybe even more of their total carbon footprint. And reducing these requires deep collaboration with suppliers, with customers, changing product design. It's complex.
No kidding. So
Right.
why go through all this effort to measure and reduce these footprints?
Well, several big reasons. Increasingly, regulatory compliance demands it. It can lead to significant cost reductions through energy efficiency and resource optimization. It provides a competitive advantage, differentiating brands. And there's immense pressure and demand from investors and customers who want to see climate action. It's really becoming table stakes.
Which leads us perfectly to this major goal many organizations are now setting, net zero. What does that actually mean in practice? How does it connect to these scopes?
Right. Net zero. It means achieving a state of balance between the greenhouse gases being put into the atmosphere and those being taken out. So the goal is total emissions minus total removals equals zero. It's about eliminating emissions as much as possible or offsetting them so that overall the organization is adding no additional carbon to the atmosphere. It's seen as absolutely critical for meeting the global climate goals set out in the Paris Agreement, particularly limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Okay, balance. Reduce emissions, remove the rest. How does a company actually get there? What's the strategy?
Typically, it's seen as a multi-step process. Step one is absolutely crucial. Rigorously measure and report all your emissions, Scope 1, Scope 2, and that tricky Scope 3.
Right.
You can't manage what you don't measure. Step two, and this is the most important part, is deep emission reductions. This is about decarbonization, transitioning to 100% renewable energy, electrifying vehicle fleets and industrial processes, improving energy efficiency, promoting sustainable transport, decarbonizing the supply chain, adopting circular economy models, really attacking those emissions sources directly. Then step three, only for those emissions that are genuinely hard to abate, those residual emissions you can't eliminate yet, you focus on carbon removal and offsetting. This can involve nature-based solutions like reforestation or soil carbon sequestration, or technology-based solutions like carbon capture and storage, CCS, or direct air capture, DAC. And using high-quality verified carbon offsets is key here.
So reduce first, remove second. That seems like a sensible hierarchy. And how does the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the SBTI, fit into this whole net zero picture?
The Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, is incredibly important here. It's a global body that provides a framework and validation service for companies to set greenhouse gas reduction targets that are genuinely aligned with climate science. Essentially, it ensures a company's targets are ambitious enough to be consistent with the Paris Agreement goals, especially that 1.5 degree C pathway. SBTI typically requires companies to set both near-term targets, usually for 5–10 years out, aiming for roughly a 50% reduction by 2030, and long-term net zero targets, which usually means achieving at least a 90% absolute reduction in emissions across all scopes by 2050 at the latest.
90% reduction.
Exactly. It emphasizes deep decarbonization. Companies commit publicly, develop their targets using SBTI methodologies, which can be sector-specific, submit them for validation by SBTI experts, and then report on their progress annually. It adds a layer of credibility and accountability to corporate climate claims.
And you mentioned a difference between net zero and just carbon neutral. Can you clarify that?
Yes, that's a really important distinction. Carbon neutrality often focuses on balancing out emissions, frequently by purchasing carbon credits or offsets, without necessarily requiring deep reductions in the company's own operational emissions first. Net zero, especially under the SBTI's definition, mandates those deep absolute emission cuts, that 90% or more reduction across the value chain before relying on carbon removal or offsets for the small remainder. So net zero is generally seen as a much more ambitious and scientifically robust goal. The benefits of pursuing net zero and setting SBTI targets are clear. Better alignment with future regulations, increased investor confidence, often significant operational cost savings from efficiency, and a strong competitive edge.
That's a crucial difference. Okay, moving beyond just emissions, but still within the ESG, there's a lot of talk about how we manage resources more broadly. You mentioned the circular economy earlier. Can you unpack that a bit more? How does it contrast with how we usually operate?
Sure. The circular economy is really a fundamental shift in thinking about production and consumption. Our dominant model for centuries has been the linear economy. We take resources from the earth, we make products, we use them, often briefly, and then we dispose of them, usually as waste in landfill or incineration. It's incredibly wasteful and relies on a constant input of new resources.
The take, make, waste model.
Exactly. The circular economy, by contrast, aims to break that linear pattern. It's designed to be restorative and regenerative by design. The goal is to minimize waste and pollution, maximize resource efficiency, and keep products and materials in use at their highest value for as long as possible. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a leading voice in this space, outlines 3 core principles. 1. Design out waste and pollution right from the start. Think about material choices, product durability, packaging. 2. Keep products and materials in use. This means designing for longevity, repair, reuse, refurbishment, remanufacturing, and ultimately recycling. And 3. Regenerate natural systems. This involves returning valuable biological nutrients safely to the earth, like composting, and transitioning fully to renewable energy sources.
So it's about closing the loop, designing products differently, keeping things circulating. Can you give some practical examples of companies putting this into action?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For designing out waste, think about modular electronics. Fairphone is a great example. A smartphone designed specifically for easy repair and component upgrades, drastically extending its usable life compared to typical phones.
Right, so you replace parts, not the whole phone.
Exactly. For keeping materials in use, look at companies like Nike with their Move to Zero initiative, incorporating recycled polyester and other materials into shoes and apparel. Or furniture companies offering take-back and refurbishment programs. Another big strategy is the product as a service, PaaS model. Instead of buying, say, a washing machine, you subscribe to laundry services or bicycle subscription services like Swap Fates in Europe. This incentivizes the company to make durable, easily maintainable products because they retain ownership.
That flips the incentive, doesn't it?
It really does. And in circular supply chains, you see companies like Dell Technologies implementing closed-loop systems to recover plastics and other materials from old computers and use them in new ones. Regenerating natural systems might involve companies supporting regenerative agriculture practices in their supply chains, or, like Apple, investing heavily to ensure their operations run on 100% renewable energy.
Okay, lots of different strategies there. And this ties into broader sustainable resource management, too.
Definitely. The circular economy is a key part of sustainable resource management. This wider concept includes things like efficient water resource management companies reducing consumption, treating wastewater for reuse, aiming for water circularity like Nestle talks about. It includes sustainable material sourcing, prioritizing renewable, recycled, or bio-based materials, like Lego exploring alternatives to traditional plastics. And even things like industrial symbiosis, where a network of companies collaborate so that one company's waste stream becomes another's input resource. The Kalundborg Industrial Park in Denmark is a classic example of this, creating a mini ecosystem. Sustainable packaging is another huge area, reducing plastic, using biodegradable or compostable materials, designing for reuse like Unilever's goals.
And the benefits seem obvious: less environmental impact, less reliance on virgin resources.
Huge benefits: reduced environmental footprint, minimized resource depletion, often significant cost savings from efficiency and waste reduction, better alignment with upcoming regulations, potentially even job creation in repair, refurbishment, and recycling sectors. And to really understand and compare the environmental impacts of different products or processes throughout their entire existence, companies often rely on a specific tool called life cycle assessment, or LCA.
Ah, LCA. So that helps quantify the impact, right? To compare options.
Precisely. LCA is a systematic method used to assess the environmental impacts associated with all the stages of a product's life, from raw material extraction, cradle, through manufacturing, distribution, use, and finally disposal or recycling, grave, or maybe cradle again in a circular model. It looks at resource use, energy consumption, emissions to air, water, and soil, waste generation, everything. The process follows international standards like ISO 14040 and 14044. You define your goal and scope, collect detailed inventory data, assess the potential impacts like global warming potential, water use, interpret the results to find hotspots, and then report findings. For instance, an LCA could clearly quantify that producing paper from recycled pulp uses significantly less energy and water and generates fewer CO2 emissions compared to using virgin wood pulp. It provides the hard data needed for informed decisions in sustainable design and procurement.
That's a powerful tool. Okay, that provides a great link to shift gears now towards the S in ESG. This pillar often feels a bit more qualitative, perhaps. It's about people, culture, ethical treatment. How are companies tackling the social dimension?
You're right. The S pillar is deeply focused on social impact and relationships. And a really central concept here, especially nowadays, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. It's worth quickly defining those terms because they're distinct. Diversity is simply the presence of differences within the workforce: race, gender, ethnicity, age, religion, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic background, even diversity of thought. Equity is about ensuring fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people by actively identifying and eliminating the systemic barriers that have historically prevented the full participation of some groups. It's not just about equality of opportunity, but ensuring fair outcomes. And inclusion is about creating a work environment and culture where every single employee feels welcomed, respected, supported, valued, and is empowered to contribute their full potential. It's about belonging.
So diversity is the mix, inclusion is making the mix work, and equity is ensuring fairness throughout. Why is this so important for businesses beyond just, being the right thing to do?
Absolutely. Beyond the clear moral imperative, there's a strong business case for DEI. Companies with more diverse and inclusive workforces often report tangible benefits: higher employee engagement and retention, better and more innovative decision-making, because you have varied perspectives challenging assumptions. stronger brand reputation, better connection with diverse customer bases, and increasingly alignment with regulatory expectations and investor priorities. Developing effective DEI strategies isn't simple. It typically involves assessing the current state through data analysis and employee feedback, setting clear, measurable goals, implementing inclusive practices in hiring, promotion, and development, actively fostering an inclusive culture through leadership commitment and things like employee resource groups, ERGs, providing training on topics like unconscious bias, and ensuring policies like pay equity or flexible work are truly equitable, then measuring progress and continuously improving.
It's a continuous process, not a one-off initiative.
Exactly. And building on DEI, the S pillar also encompasses these broader, critical areas like human rights, labor standards, and ensuring ethical supply chains.
Yeah.
Human rights refers to the basic rights and freedoms inherent to all human beings, often codified in things like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. For businesses, this means respecting rights like freedom from forced labor or child labor, ensuring safe and healthy working conditions, non-discrimination, freedom of association. Labor standards often draw from the International Labor Organization (ILO) conventions, covering things like fair wages, reasonable working hours, occupational health and safety, social protection, and protection against exploitation. And an ethical supply chain means ensuring that the goods and services a company sources are produced and delivered in a way that is socially responsible, environmentally sound, and legally compliant all the way down the chain.
That sounds like a monumental task, especially for companies with complex global supply chains reaching into regions with maybe weaker regulations or enforcement. How do they even begin to tackle that?
It is certainly a major challenge, no doubt. It requires a systematic approach. It usually starts with establishing clear corporate policies that commit the company to respecting human rights and fair labor standards, often referencing those international frameworks like the UNGPs or ILO standards. Then comes the hard work of due diligence and risk assessment. This involves mapping out their supply chain, understanding who their suppliers are, and their suppliers identifying where the biggest risks of human rights abuses or poor labor practices might lie, maybe through audits or assessments. Based on that, they implement ethical sourcing practices. This often includes having a supplier code of conduct that lays out expectations and building those expectations into contracts. Training and capacity building for both internal teams and suppliers is also key, as is ongoing monitoring, auditing, and having grievance mechanisms so workers can raise concerns. And finally, transparency, reporting publicly on their efforts, challenges, and progress using frameworks like GRI or maybe certifications like Fair Trade or SA 8000. It's tough, but the benefits are significant. Stronger brand reputation, reduced legal and reputational risk, often better, more stable supplier relationships, increased employee satisfaction, and ultimately more sustainable business growth.
Okay, so that covers the S. Now, this brings us to a really crucial point. How do companies ensure they're actually run ethically and transparently? The G in ESG corporate governance feels like it must be the foundation for making all the E and S stuff actually happen, right?
It absolutely is the bedrock. You can have great environmental policies or social programs, but if the governance isn't strong, they might not be effectively implemented or overseen. So corporate governance, in the ESG context, refers to the whole system of rules, practices, policies, and processes that direct and control a company. It's fundamentally about ensuring the company operates responsibly and ethically, balancing the often competing interests of its various stakeholders, shareholders, yes, but also management, employees, customers, suppliers, the community, regulators. Key elements include things like the board structure. Is it independent? Is it diverse? Does it have the right skills? How is executive compensation structured? Is it linked just to financial results or also to ESG performance? What are the shareholder rights? How robust are the company's risk management and compliance systems?
So it's the whole system of checks and balances. And what about the board's specific role in ESG oversight?
That's board oversight in ESG, and it's becoming increasingly critical. It's about how the board of directors actively ensures that ESG considerations are integrated into the company's strategy, risk management, and overall decision-making. The board is ultimately responsible for setting the tone from the top, approving the ESG strategy, ensuring adequate resources are allocated, engaging with key stakeholders on ESG issues, overseeing how ESG risks and opportunities are managed, and ensuring the accuracy and transparency of ESG reporting and disclosures. Having board members with specific ESG expertise, or maybe a dedicated ESG committee on the board, is becoming much more common and expected.
So the board needs to be actively engaged, not just passively receiving reports. And where does anti-corruption fit into this governance picture?
Anti-corruption is a absolutely critical component of good governance. Anti-corruption measures refer to all the efforts a company undertakes to prevent, detect, and address bribery, fraud, and other unethical business practices. These are essential for maintaining integrity, building trust with stakeholders, and avoiding massive legal and reputational damage. Key measures include having clear and strongly enforced anti-bribery and anti-corruption policies, providing regular training to employees, implementing robust whistleblower protection programs so employees feel safe reporting suspected misconduct, conducting thorough third-party due diligence, especially when dealing with agents or partners in high-risk markets, and ensuring strict compliance with relevant laws like the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, or the UK Bribery Act.
Okay, so how do companies actually put all this together? Strong governance, effective board oversight, robust anti-corruption. What are the practical steps?
Well, it involves several things. Strengthening governance structures, maybe enhancing board independence, ensuring diversity of skills and backgrounds on the board, developing clear ESG policies, and importantly, linking executive compensation meaningfully to achieving ESG targets. Improving board oversight, this could mean establishing that dedicated ESG committee, ensuring ESG is a regular agenda item, providing directors with the right information and training, and enforcing anti-corruption measures rigorously through regular training, promoting a speak-up culture, having secure reporting channels like whistleblower hotlines, conducting periodic risk assessments, and taking swift action when issues arise. The benefits of getting the G right are immense. It builds crucial investor trust and confidence, reduces financial, legal, and reputational risks, can enhance market valuation, and ultimately ensures more sustainable long-term growth. It really underpins everything else in ESG.
It really sounds like the G is the glue that holds effective E and S performance together. So with all these complex interlocking parts, environmental impacts, social responsibilities, governance structures, how do companies effectively manage the risks associated with all this and ensure they're actually compliant with the various standards and regulations we've talked about? It sounds like a huge ongoing task.
It absolutely is a substantial ongoing challenge, and that's where systematic ESG risk management becomes so vital. It's about identifying potential threats across all three pillars, E, S, and G, and implementing robust strategies to mitigate or manage those risks. For example, looking at environmental risks, things like the physical impacts of climate change, pollution liabilities, biodiversity loss, resource scarcity. Mitigation strategies here involve things we've discussed: reducing the carbon footprint, adopting circular economy principles, robust waste management, and often implementing a certified environmental management system, or EMS, like ISO 14001.
ISO standards, we hear those mentioned a lot. How do they fit into managing these broad ESG risks? Are they like a checklist?
They're much more than a checklist. ISO standards provide internationally recognized frameworks for establishing and operating management systems focused on specific areas. They promote a systematic approach based on the Plan-Do Check Act cycle for continuous improvement. So, ISO 14001, the Environmental Management System Standard, helps an organization manage its environmental responsibilities in a systematic way. It focuses on aspects like resource use, waste management, pollution prevention. Getting certified demonstrates a structured approach to environmental performance and compliance.
Okay, so ISO 14001 for environmental management. What about other key ISO standards relevant to ESG?
Well, moving to social risks like poor labor practices, workplace safety issues, diversity and inclusion challenges, product safety concerns, negative community impacts. Mitigation here might involve implementing fair wage policies, ethical sourcing audits, strong stakeholder engagement programs, and crucially, adopting ISO 4501, which is the standard for occupational health and safety management systems, OH&S. ISO 44501 helps organizations provide safe and healthy workplaces, prevent work-related injury and ill health, and proactively improve OH&S performance. It directly addresses key social risks related to employee well-being.
Right, safety is a huge S component.
Definitely. And then for governance risks, things like fraud, bribery, lack of transparency, poor board oversight, cybersecurity breaches, non-compliance with regulations. Mitigation involves those strong governance structures we discussed, clear ethics policies, compliance programs, whistleblower protection. And often, implementing ISO 27001, the Standard for Information Security Management Systems, ISMS. In today's world, protecting sensitive data, customer data, employee data, intellectual property is a massive governance challenge. ISO 27001 provides a framework for managing information security risks systematically.
Okay, so data security falls under governance risk. Makes sense. Are there others?
Another important one, especially for the EE, is ISO 5001 for energy management systems, ENMS. This helps organizations systematically optimize their energy performance, reduce energy consumption and costs, and improve energy efficiency, directly supporting carbon reduction and net zero goals.
So these ISO certifications aren't just badges to put on a website. They represent real embedded operational systems for managing specific ESG risks. How does a company actually get certified?
It's a pretty rigorous process. Typically, it starts with a gap analysis to see where the organization currently stands against the standards requirements. Then they need to develop and implement the management system policies, procedures, controls. This is often the heaviest lift. After that, they conduct internal audits to check if the system is working as intended. Then comes the certification audit, usually done by an accredited third-party certification body. This often happens in 2 stages. Stage 1, documentation review, and Stage 2, implementation audit. If they pass, they receive the certification, which is usually valid for 3 years, subject to annual surveillance audits. And the key is continuous improvement. The system needs to be maintained and constantly refined.
It sounds like a significant commitment. Why do companies go through it?
Several key reasons. It significantly boosts credibility and stakeholder confidence. It provides assurance that they have a systematic approach. It helps ensure regulatory compliance and effective risk management. It can lead to real operational efficiencies and cost savings, like with ISO 5001, and it strengthens their overall sustainability performance and reputation. It's a clear, verifiable signal that they're managing these critical ESG aspects seriously.
Wow. Okay. We have covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed through the whole intricate world of ESG, from its core principles, the key difference from CSR, to the global regulations popping up everywhere, the different reporting frameworks like GRI, SSB, TCFD. And then we really dove deep into the specifics of the East carbon footprints, net zero, circular economy, LCA, the SDEI, human rights, ethical supply chains, and the G governance, board oversight, anti-corruption, and using ISO standards for risk management. It's a truly vast and interconnected landscape, isn't it?
It really is. And I think what's so fascinating, or maybe what stands out most, is just how interconnected all these elements are. It really demonstrates that sustainability, ESG, it isn't just some vague buzzword or a side project anymore. It's become a measurable strategic imperative for businesses, for investors, for driving long-term value and resilience in what's frankly an increasingly complex world. It's really about shifting from just doing good occasionally to being good systematically, accountably.
Absolutely. And hopefully for everyone listening, you now have a much more comprehensive understanding, packed with those specifics and examples. Hopefully it equips you to engage more deeply with this critical topic, whether it's in your work, your investments, or just your understanding of the world.
And maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up. In this world that's clearly moving towards greater transparency and accountability on these issues, how might ESG principles fundamentally reshape the competitive landscape of your industry over, say, the next 5 years? What specific opportunities and what challenges does this shift present for innovation, for strategy, and for long-term value creation right where you are?
That's a great thought to leave everyone with. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep applying this knowledge. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.